Okay, so this was pretty much what I wanted to try and go through. It's around 2 hours. What do we mean by sustainability? Why does sustainability matter to business? We're going to look at some strategies, how you can apply this in your organization, thinking about processes and frameworks that you can use to try and implement it. Of course, you know, it's not always easy to do things if you're feeling like a lone wolf in an organization where you feel like nobody else seems to care so much about this matter. So it's also important to think about how do you build those coalitions that you can support, persuade management. And I also, like I mentioned, I think that innovation plays such an important role, even whether or not you do it internally through your organizations, whether or not you are consulting companies on innovation, or whether or not you're looking around to try and solve a particular sustainable problem that you have. I think that innovation startups, they actually play an important role. I want to try and do a little bit of group work, if possible. Just some, it may seem like a little bit small or parochial, as we would say in the UK, but hopefully it will get the ball moving if you're already struggling to sort of start, but to get you to come together and think in teams about the SDGs and maybe some thinking about some practical things that you might be able to implement in your organizations or in the next interactions that you have. So we'll do something like that a little later, and I'm going to ask you then to present them, to present your ideas and discuss why they seem to be important for you. Okay, so this is about us sharing. Sharing is caring, and that's what we want to achieve today. Okay, so it probably goes without saying that sustainability is nothing new. I think that we've at some particular point had in our minds the fact that actually we have quite a real impact on the environment that we live in. I remember listening to stories back in, I don't know, in London back when we used to have a lot of smog because we had all the industry and all the chimneys, and people would actually have to walk out with a light and guide the cars. They'd be walking the cars down the streets because there was so much pollution in the air. There was even policies put through Parliament because the River Thames was essentially a flowing sewer, open sewer going through London. So, you know, we know that we are aware of when these sorts of situations happens, when the environment is affected badly, and when governments then step in. So there has been like this steady progress. I would say like since 1972, when the world actually convened to resolve some of the development challenges. So you had in 1972, you had the UN Stockholm Conference, which was to establish essentially agencies in different countries for tackling environmental challenges. And then you have the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, where you had the Agenda 21 that came along. This was kind of when, I would say, in my consciousness, in my life, sustainability became something more present in my life. Kyoto Protocol in Japan. And then, of course, the UN Millennium Summit, which established those eight goals for sustainable development. And there was this period between 2000 and 2015 when we tried to tackle some of the world's big sustainable challenges, such as trying to eradicate things such as extreme poverty, try to reduce or eradicate diseases like malaria and HIV, and what have you, and basically try to address some of the issues around sustainability. It was rather interesting. I think it had some positive impacts. About 1 billion people at that time came out of extreme poverty. So on this sort of foundation, we had the UN Sustainable Development Summit, which was to sort of try to build on top of that. And we had the creation of now what you probably are quite familiar with. If not, it's the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which sort of look at all aspects of sustainable development, going from anything from how we affect the climate, the environment under the seas, to gender equality, etc., etc. And of course, pretty much from the 1995 right the way up to the present day, we have these COP conferences. You might remember the famous one in Paris in COP21, I think it was, in which something like 192 countries sort of signed up with the idea to actually mandate sustainable development and to commit to targets. And then Donald Trump came in, and the first thing he did was withdrew from the Paris Agreement. So it shows that although there is a lot of progress that we've come through, it's still very fragile, you know, and when you have big players like the United States taking a seat, if they remove themselves, then it has significant impact, and we have to be mindful of this. So your voices, and whenever we have the opportunity to vote and to go out and participate in such things, we should do so, even if it's not our country. Okay. Okay. So. Is anyone here aware of this Earth Overshoot Day? Right? It's basically if you took if we looked at the Earth and we thought to ourselves, okay, how many Earths do we need to be able to enable the people of the world to live as we do? We would actually need about 1.75 Earths, right? So you can sort of see that it was kind of sustainable at some particular point, and then it's gradually got worse over time. And around here, you start to have some of these the effects of the Millennium Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals, and then you sort of have a little bit of a freezing of this. But basically, the idea is to show you that yeah, essentially, it's getting worse, and we can look at this, break this down into countries. Romania is around here. Basically, by July 20th, the surplus Earth resources that we would need would actually run out for Romania if everyone lived here. But of course, if we go all the way up around here, where's the United Kingdom? It's got to be somewhere. I should have. Here we go. We're down here, so we're back in June 3rd. But you can sort of see that there are certain countries like Qatar, you know, it doesn't take long for them to actually consume all of the surplus resources that the Earth could offer if we all lived like people in Qatar. I should also incidentally mention that there are countries around the world that actually do not overshoot. So, you know, and that's because maybe they don't have maybe reliable electricity supplies, or they're more in tune with the environment. But I would recommend checking out this. You can have a look at the sources, the National Footprint for Biocapacity accounts, and that's quite an interesting one. Actually, if we look at some of these major indicators that may explain where we're going in terms of sustainability, the fact that the population of the world is massively expanding has a big problem. So there's basically been a boom in our demographics and a lack of availability of certain resources, leading to more catastrophic impacts on the environment. And of course, you know, some of the things that we can see here: fertilizer consumption that goes up because we need to feed more people. Usually feeding more people means more water being used. So actually all of the indicators are pretty frightening. So there is really a strong need for us to look at sustainability. So in what context do we want to look at it? So we have this, so now we sort of move more on from what the current status quo is, and start looking at what the implications are for business. So now it's kind of becoming more and more important, and for as you mentioned, for those larger companies with over 250 and who are listed, they have to start thinking about what their impact is, and these are pretty much the domains. So you can look at people, company, your community, and your society. Community I put in there because I think it's also something that's extremely relevant, because actually you can feel your community, whilst actually society is something that feels a little bit more nebula. But nowadays there's a greater need, and I mentioned a little bit before about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And then for business, there's this ESG component, which is looking at the environment, social, and governance. And companies are more and more having to report on their impact on these particular areas. And what you can see here is actually how those 17 development goals actually go here. So it's very difficult to actually read on this screen, but it's worthwhile checking out. So, boom. So this is probably the best sort of indicator that we have in terms of what sustainability means for business. It came from the Gro Harlem Brundtland report back in 1987. Report on our common future, and it says that for the business enterprise, sustainable development means adopting business strategies and activities that meet the needs of the enterprise and its stakeholders today while protecting and sustaining and enhancing the human and natural resources that will be needed in the future. There's nothing here that says that as a business you can't go out there and generate tremendous profits and become filthy rich and buy a yacht. It just simply means that you should do it in a sustainable way. And I actually think that when a lot of people look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and I should also mention that those are broad sort of areas that you can sort of look into, and then each one, such as if you look at under the water, for example, the quality of our oceans, it breaks down into sort of reducing the amount of microplastics or plastics going into the oceans, as well as other important targets. So when you have the opportunity, it's also good to do some further research, and you'll be able to see those. But surprisingly, or not surprisingly, actually a lot of the sustainable development that we do is very much aligned with business drivers, such as the desire to reduce costs, to enhance the use of, to make more effective use of the resources that we have, to preserve resources, to comply with regulations is a big one. I think the regulation EU WEEE requires manufacturers now to look at ways in which they take back products that they produce in order to reuse them or recycle them. To enhance your reputation, it was Warren Buffett who turned around and said that it takes 20 minutes to build up it takes 20 years to build a reputation, but it can take 5 minutes to destroy it. So I think that these are things that are extremely important. I think that you just have to, a good example maybe would be look at British Petroleum, or it used to be called British Petroleum, now it's like Beyond Petroleum. One of the things that when they had the accident in the Gulf of Mexico, I think that the British government actually went out to the Americans and said, stop calling it British Petroleum. It's giving us a bad name. It's actually called Beyond Petroleum. They did a rebranding. This, for me, is also what we talked about in terms of greenwashing. And they created, I don't know if you've ever seen the British Petroleum logo, if you've ever filled up. It looks like a beautiful green flower, and we start to think, oh, wow, maybe this is not a bad company. And
we know it because of your plagiarism, because Rompetrol copied that flower but made it more red. So if you go to see some gas stations in Romania, they are called Rompetrol and imitate that flower. So we know it very well.
Okay, interesting.
From international market, but also from the local market, because maybe the rights, intellectual property were not very good back then, and the flowers are virtually the same.
Yeah.
But that's more green. The British Petroleum, the Beyond Petroleum is more green. Ours is red, more red.
Well, it's probably because you have hotter summers, so more sugar is cultivated in those beautiful plants. There is there are all these things. Here's a big one, like to differentiate, to switch up and to create. I'm going to just come over here and play around with the rug. It likes to walk. I'm walking the rug here. Okay. So another one is like a differentiator. It's an opportunity for you to make a distinction between your product or service and other people's. It sounds like there's, when you talk about green and your green financing portfolio, actually it's nice as a differentiator, but it's a shame that it's not working in the right direction. I think we can change this. It's actually important to attract talent, you know, because more and more people are going through our education systems and actually coming out and saying, okay, I want to work for a company that is actually aligned with my own values. And so being a company that is actually has a focus, has a strategy for being sustainable is also an important thing for attracting those talents. I think it was, I just have here just a quick note, because the CEO of IKEA, former CEO of IKEA, Anders Davik, he said that actually there was so much pressure coming from within to go green, because actually the employees and the colleagues actually wanted to feel proud of being part of a company that actually didn't strip the world of its forests. You know, they wanted to work for a company and feel proud of working for a company that that was sustainable, had that as a mission. And equally, not only just thinking about employees, but customers are becoming ever more aware. You know, when it goes out to making choices, this is something that is extremely important. The biggest problem that we have now is the fact that we just don't know. We don't know enough, and it's very difficult to make better and informed choices as customers when companies aren't reporting and telling us. And this is what we're going to talk about shortly, about regulations and the importance that they play in actually improving transparency. So meet stakeholder expectations, attract investment, benefits from new opportunities. That's rather vague, but it's also, I will talk a little bit about the opportunities in terms of business models and how you redefine how you make money in a company. And of course, here we talk about increasing transparency. So the big one that's coming up, I don't want to dive too much into this particular topic, because I think that there are people out there who are far more aware and knowledgeable on this regards, but I put up a whole bunch of text here just to try to give you an idea of what's coming. So basically, there are several EU sustainability regulations that are actually coming into effect in 2024 and 2025. One which you've already mentioned is actually going to require the larger companies to actually step in and start doing reporting. And they're going to have to do that, I think, in 2025. But the key thing here is, like, you may be part of a big company, or you actually may be just part of a small company. You might be thinking, okay, these things don't matter to me. But if you are selling products and services to these larger companies, you're going to be part of their supply chain, their logistics, perhaps potentially, and the key thing here is that you have to understand that you will be expected to be able to have an audit and an understanding of what your contribution is to CO2 and your footprint, and how you're affecting things such as, I don't know, where you supply your materials from. Are you ensuring that if you purchase your products from some obscure country, that you're ensuring that there's no slave labor in there, or what have you? So you have to be very mindful of these things. So it's going to be something that will attract everyone. And I think it's quite a great strategy from the EU to do it this way, because what these large companies are doing is they're having a massive pull factor. You know, they're not saying to you as small and startups or small and medium-sized companies that you have to do it, but it's coming. It's coming, and you can imagine that in 2026 this will start to proliferate down the size of companies. You also have things like the EU deforestation regulation, energy performance of buildings directive. That's a great one. Who here actually works in a company that has big office buildings? Yes, perfect. Okay. You know, this is going to be something that's interesting. I'm going to present you a company that is actually developing technology that can actually help you to make your buildings more sustainable, help reduce your costs too. That's the big one. And then you have the corporate sustainability due diligence, okay? And these sort of more broadly fit into this Green New Deal you've probably heard, where basically the EU has a goal of becoming net zero by 2025. And there are certain things that it has defined here, such as coming to net zero greenhouse gases, the whole decarbonization of different key sectors. You'll see a lot of renewable technology, for example, coming on stream. I think it was this week, the UK shut down the last coal power station. Yeah. And this is something that is quite significant because obviously the UK is trying to be a world leader in this area where, you know, it's the pretty much the largest or developed country that is actually no longer generating any of its energy from coal. I hope that's true when we import a lot of energy, that the people that we're getting it from also aren't using coal. Probably if it's from France and it's nuclear, if it's from Iceland, it's probably more likely to be thermal. But it's a good sign anyway. We also saw the closure of one of our old blast furnaces, you know, in South Wales. So this is a kind of an old traditional way of producing, obviously, steel. But from the government's perspective, it doesn't make any sense to continue it, especially now when there are these electric furnaces that you can use, which are actually better placed for recycling materials. And that sort of fits in line with the whole agenda here, which is to create this more circular economy. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. And of course, the just transition is the idea that as we transition from those fossil fuel industries, that we actually, in the right way, find opportunities for the people who are affected by this. You know, the communities, the individuals who are actually working those industries, who need to either be retrained, supported, relocated, et cetera, in the best possible way. So the effect on people is not so great. And then there's this other term that maybe you've heard of. It's the EU taxonomy. It's their way of trying to aggregate and give you some ideas about how you should label and think about your impact of sustainability. You have to get all the way down to here. These 6 environmental objectives include climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, transition to circular economy, pollution prevention and control, protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. What you'll find is that it gets very confusing because you have a lot of different terms and different ways to organize information. But the main reason why we do this is because of transparency. And actually, one of the things I would actually say about transparency is that this provides a lot of companies real opportunities to start to think more creatively about what they do with their businesses, because for the first time there's going to be a lot more data. For the first time, companies are really going to have the opportunity to understand what their businesses are actually doing at a very granular level, you know, so that you can take more affirmative actions and make changes based on evidence, not just simply on gut feeling. And of course, there is the challenge of greenwashing, which is pretty much to deceive consumers with claims that are not really backed up by any sort of significant evidence, looking at mislabeling and things like highlighting big positive change whilst actually they're not. So I think that we also have to be mindful in terms of when we think about some of the practical steps I'm going to talk about, how it's important that they exist, but it's not necessary. You have to also put it in perspective in terms of how big your organizations are and what you do. It's, if you decide to ride your bike to work, that doesn't necessarily make your business a revolutionary, sustainable business, and you shouldn't go out there and say so, because that is greenwashing. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be going to work by bike. Okay. I like this one, okay, because I like this particular thought. I'm a huge fan of a British guy. He's more focused on marketing and the way in which we perceive things, and And what he says is that not all innovation has to be an engineered solution. The psychological solutions can be innovative too. And he tells a great story. And the great story is that in order to make people's journeys from Paris to London something like 45 minutes faster, what they did was they spent something like 6, 7, 8 billion pounds on building a high-speed rail link between Calais, when at the end of the tunnel, and coming into central London. And what he does is he says that very, very often the first thing that people do when they try to think about, okay, how can we, because you want people to go on trains, right? You want people to feel, okay, well, actually, this is a good alternative to flying between these two cities. So people think, oh, let's make it faster. And then you end up spending all this money on building this. And what he says was that had they actually turned around and said, okay, well, maybe we should put some free Wi-Fi onto the train first and build that infrastructure in, then the thing that people are concerned about, which is not getting to the office where they can actually finish off their work and do their work, this goes away. And people start to feel good. And he said that, okay, so if you spend $1 billion doing that, now if you spent half the rest on giving people champagne and you hired some of the top models, male and female models in the world, and you got them to serve them, then people would be positively asking for the trains to slow down. and so the great thing here is to actually start to think a little bit differently about the solutions. It doesn't always have to be engineered. I want to show you this as a fun example. So I've been drinking water over the last few days. Thank you. I'm keeping myself hydrated. I don't know if you've noticed this, but like one of the changes that's happened in terms of products and how they've been changed is that now you have this thing here. Okay. Now some people. I've not been in the UK recent enough to be able to tell you. Yeah. So you have this, and what you see is that actually there are lots of different ways this lid now works, right? So some clip on and it gives you the ability to not have this thing going in your face. Others sort of like dangle off and what have you. Others are quite clever. You sort of take it in, and it has this ability for you to pull it over and down. So it's completely out of the way. It's incredible. So there are lots of different solutions. People are innovating a lot about this. And what you don't want is you don't want small bits of plastic sort of leaving, going into the environment and causing problems. It's better if you keep it here. But it also does one other thing. It actually makes this reusable because I've not lost the lid. So I can go out there and fill it up and put on the lid, and then I can use it again. And when I came here, we picked up a bottle of water from a kebab shop. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. It was the only place that was open, and I had a nice drink. And this one's an example of a lid that comes off. And this is actually, I guess, a product from Turkey. Yes. Yeah. And so you can automatically see how EU regulation is potentially having a very positive impact. And it's very small, but it's important. And then if you want to go one step further, I was at this conference, as I mentioned, and you get a product like this. This is not even plastic, right? It's like glass. It's an alternative product. And they put a nice little lid on it, so it's like shiny. You want to keep that because it looks nice. It's not plasticky, you don't want to forget about that. And all of a sudden you've got a product that you actually might use and take around with you and keep on your person. So there are lots of different ways in which people are innovating, and that's something that's really important. So new business models. Do I want to go too deep into this at this particular stage? There was just some ideas around the banking area, because I think that it's actually quite an interesting space, because a lot of banks are actually being really affected in terms of these ESGs, in terms of how they think about financing, what they finance, what their responsibilities are when they actually give money that actually helps to develop and grow business. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for banks to actually create interesting and diverse green products that people can actually get involved in. But I want to sort of just briefly, who here is not familiar with the topic of a circular economy? Oh, that's great. Yeah, so you're all super aware. So I won't go into too much detail, but essentially you get the raw materials in. This is like a key thing. So if you're in a company that actually produces anything, going back to your design and rethinking some of the first principles of your product is somehow really important, because that's going to have an impact on everything else that comes out here, especially what goes into residual waste and what actually becomes waste management. And pretty much along this particular journey, this life cycle, we're hopefully, the goal is not obviously to eradicate it, but at least to be able to reuse products sufficiently enough so that the earth has the ability to actually renew itself or to produce the resources. Okay, so I want to give you a quick case study here. This is a company, it's based in Graz, actually. I really like the guy. He was a founder of a product called Macava, which is like an iced tea with a caffeine kick. And they produced this because they wanted an alternative drink. They thought that they would do it in a nice, sustainable way. The founder then went on and created this company, Freisein, and they wanted to create these apparel, this clothing. The idea is that you pretty much go out there, you buy this product, you wear it, and when it gets damaged and it starts to become a problem for you to wear it, you send it back, they repair it, they send it you back, and then you can continue using it, or they refurbish it and they sell it on to someone else. At the very end of its life, you take it, you put it in the ground, and it just disappears. So everything from zippers, buttons, what have you, everything just is biodegradable. And that was their sort of concept. And that's great, right? But if you want to think more expansively as a business, what is a better thing to do? Is to say, okay, well, we've done a lot of innovation in terms of our textiles. Why don't we create a Gore-Tex out of that, and actually use this as a starting point for getting other people who manufacture apparel clothing to use their materials. And so just in that very short journey, they've actually taken the ability to, they've looked at different business models and they've evolved, and now they're actually developing fabrics for apparel companies. And so this is something that's really exciting. So again, it's a company that I would say that if you're producing clothes, or if you're consulting people who manufacture clothes, it's a very interesting one to look at. I want to talk a little bit now about, this is just like maybe an interlude, it's like a little, it's not an advert or something like that, but it's a fun story. So how many of you know how bees work? Give it a go. Somebody tell me, how do bees work? Yeah, give me a second. Yeah, what happens in a beehive? Yeah, so the scientists basically worked out that bees have a unique way of communicating with one another. Okay, it's called the waggle dance. So a bee goes off, it finds a plush meadow of flowers, it comes back and it does a little dance, and it communicates to all the other bees that, hey, let's go there and pick up some pollen, right? And that's great, but actually they found that somewhere between 10 and 20% of all the bees are kind of a little bit, let's say, rebellious. And what they do is they ignore the waggle dance and they just go fly anywhere. Nobody knows why. And one of the things that this is quite an interesting story that I picked up, but basically you'd sort of think to yourself, well, after so much time of evolution, why doesn't a beehive ensure that all of the bees are sticking to the rules and following the waggle dance and optimizing the production of honey and nectar? It's because when you have those simple systems, you have a greater risk of these beehives dying out. When you have so if that meadow suddenly gets developed on, then all the sources of nectar disappear and the beehive will actually die. But because of those creative bees that go out into the world and try to identify other sources, they actually ensure the beehive is actually more survivable. And you're probably thinking to yourself, why is he telling me about bees? It's because I think that in organizations we need people who are creative, who think outside the box, people who are prepared to actually look at the world in a different way. And I think that that's something that's important here. So it's a little lesson from nature, let's call it that. I put this up here, I don't know why. I'm a child of the 80s, so the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle seems pretty cool here. But the reason why I have it here is because I think that's important as individuals in your organizations or when you interact with people to actually be a little bit radical. By radical, I'm not trying to suggest cool and funky, but actually in how you think and interpret the opportunities. I think that very often we get dragged down by corporate culture, we get dragged down by the system, we hear people saying things like, no, it's not possible, and we change our mindset. I think it's good to actually think a little bit creatively and be a bit radical sometimes when we think about the challenges and the solutions that we need to bring to the table. Okay, so I just threw up these, right? So to start, you don't have to break the wheel, you know, so when it comes to sustainability, and I think that this is something that's really important, we simply just need to start turning it. You know, and there's lots of different things that you can think of as an organization which has impact, it's important. And it's important not just for the company or the organization, it might be important for you personally, and of course, thinking more broadly, looking into the environment. So this here is just a quick list, but I want to give you a nice example. So if you are a company and you go out there and you say, okay, we have a lot of employees who are traveling to work every day, most of them taking cars, let's say that, and you actually want to say, okay, how do we influence or impact the behaviors of the people who are working within our organization? There's many things that you can actually start to think about. You know, you can start to think to yourself, okay, well, we're going to encourage people to go by bike. It's a very simple one, right? But saying go by bike doesn't make people go by bike. So the important thing here is to start thinking to yourself, okay, how do we encourage bike? Well, we might offer our employees an annual bike service. You know, so if you have a bike, come along, we'll make sure it gets serviced so it's safe and it's all good. You might want to have a puncture repair kit in the office, you know, or provide free helmets because you also want to protect their brains. Okay, but the idea here is that don't just virtue an idea that you think will actually make your business more operatively sustainable, but actually start to think about, okay, what can you actually do within your organizations to make it happen? And it doesn't take much to go from one thought to the next, where you actually can start to think about things in a more pragmatic and practical way. I like this one. So reduce water usage. How many of you have gone into the toilet and gone, and like had the massive pressure of water, you know? By actually talking to your facility manager and saying, hey, could you tone down the pressure a little bit? You can have your hands washed to a very high level, and you actually waste a lot less water, even if you cut down the pressure by half. It's like half the amount of water leaving your system. I mean, like, these are very simple things, but they require a high level of collaboration. And you need to be able to speak to people who are producing the services that you're using. How many of you actually have recycling bins in your offices? Yeah? Regularly. That's good. That's a good thing. I think that for me, I think that this is something that is so simple to actually implement and do, and I think it's really important. Let's see, what have I got here? I like this one, promoting remote and flexible work. You know, I mean, like, we went through this COVID thing. It seems like a long time ago, but it actually changed the world in a way. And our attitudes to remote working changed as well. And the thing is that if you have, let's say now you've got your colleagues and they're going to work, they have to go by car, because let's say not all journeys can be done by bike, then why not give them the flexibility to come in an hour later and maybe work an hour later, or come in an hour earlier and have that recognized, and so that they can leave an hour earlier, or whatever it is, so that they can avoid the queues, the traffic. I heard today that, that Bucharest has a huge challenge with traffic. I heard them beeping the horns. I was trying to sleep. They're up early. Yeah, but being a little bit more flexible there, or actually turning around to people and saying, okay, it's a rainy day today, why don't you work from home? I know that doesn't always work and it's not always possible, but I mean, having a degree of flexibility is actually something that's really quite important. And you can implement this. These are things that are very simple to think about and to think about how you do it.
That the traffic is much lighter on Monday and Friday.
Okay.
Because absolutely everybody is working from home.
Yeah.
Because flexible and hybrid work is the norm in all our companies.
Yes, and I think it's really, the company that I work for, I only have to be there, I'm contractually obliged to be there only between 9 and 12. Okay? Every time around that, I can be flexible. I can work myself a 10-hour day. I can work myself a 3-hour day. You know, I have that flexibility. And what it does do is it gives me a lot more opportunities to think about, okay, how do I do my work and how do I invest my work effort in a way that actually benefits the company the most. I like this. This whole idea, you talked a little bit about it before, you know, like being an advocate for climate and sustainability. I think that this is something that's really important. I think that when you think a little bit more about the outreach and your impact on the surrounding communities, I think when you go out there and you actually talk with, I don't know, schools and going in and talking about what your organizations are doing, this is something that I think is really important. One of the things that I didn't put here, but I think it's really important also, is that you're all here now. And I think that one of the best things that you guys can do is actually to exchange your LinkedIn or your WhatsApp details and actually start to have communication and throw in ideas and talk and collaborate. Because I think that that's one of the things that actually will affect change. Okay. But here's the thing, okay? The matrix, yeah. I think that generally, what tends to happen is that when you go out and you create all of your ideas, I think at some particular point you're going to have to prioritize them, right? You have to think, okay, which ones are really implementable. And when you go to your management and you say, hey, listen, we want to implement this, you know, it doesn't make sense to give them loads and loads and loads of options at once. Keep it very simple. The simple story here is that Tesla, for example, they created the electric car. Well, they didn't create the electric car. Actually, an Austrian guy did some 120 years ago. I heard that, and I don't know if it's true, but I heard that one of the reasons why electric cars didn't take off was because they were too quiet and gentle, and then therefore they were seen as rather feminine. Yeah, it's a strange one, because actually the technology was there, and of course the lobbying from the petrol and hydrochemical companies as well, but that's the other side. But I'm talking about the psychological perception of things. With Tesla, basically, they decided to go mass production of electric cars. They took a lead in this area. So pretty much you had the choice, you know, do I go for electric or do I not? If I go for electric, I just go for a Tesla. Okay?
Switch a Tesla on ludicrous mode and you'll see that it's not silent. Oh.
Yes, yeah, because you got a lot of a lot of the noise from traction and the wheels. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, but now if you look at China, it's got like 100 or so different electric car manufacturers, and you can imagine that this is going to be there's going to be a massive consolidation, and we're going to be seeing which of those companies are actually going to survive at some particular point. But sometimes having too many choices stops people from actually taking action. So I think that strategically, when you want to present an idea, try to keep it simple and give a number of options. I think it's really important to talk about how when it comes to I will talk about this a little later, but I'm going to go to the next slide. So it's important that we understand how you're going to implement sustainability. So I've put these sort of questions up on the board. This is just my nice bullet point list. By the way, I hate bullet points. I give pitch training to startups all the time. I tell them, please don't use bullet points. I will be very sad if I see bullet points. But I have to say, sometimes it's just information. And hopefully I'm talking a good game and I'm keeping you focused away from the slides. But in any case, back to the slide. So what is the status quo of your position on sustainability? So I think it's really important that when you start this process, that you actually start to think, okay, what is my attitude towards sustainability? Okay, what is the policy of the company that I'm working for? What is their attitude to sustainability? I think that it's important to know, how are you actually impacting society around you? And how is the society around you actually impacting you? So understanding what the status quo is something that's an important starting point for, I think, somebody who's beginning this journey of like, okay, how can I implement more practical sustainability? You need to know where you stand right now. The second thing is, what is happening around you on sustainability? Okay, so for me, we've already talked about it, it's looking at regulations. These are some of the things that are actually impacting you. But there is also a lot to look at in terms of best practices and what other organizations are doing on sustainability. The great thing is that sustainability is one of those topics that everyone wants to shout about. And if you're prepared to listen, there's a lot of information out there about what companies are trying to do in order to become more sustainable. You just have to very often scroll to the bottom, look at the values of the company and click on that, and they usually talk about it. I think it's also really important to know, where do you want to go and why? What is your intrinsic motivation for going somewhere? And it's really important to understand, what are the drivers? Do you have like a passionate CEO or director or manager who's actually a strong advocate, who wants to change the organization and make it more sustainable? I think it's also important to understand, what is the business case for becoming more sustainable, and it's also really important that you have an opportunity to understand, get as much details that you can on where you currently stand, because obviously it's only from that you can actually understand how far you're going to travel. Do you have supporters around you? This could be other stakeholders. This could also be your business partners, thinking about your suppliers, etc., etc. And then have you defined any? Do you have a plan or defined milestones to achieve? What do you actually want to achieve? And then how will you sustain it? So very often, I think that I'm going to just quickly go into this, because this is more of a visual representation of what I've just talked about. And it's really important that the whole sustaining of the whole process is something that's important to consider, because very often we start an initiative. Very rarely do we actually have the opportunity to go back and reflect, because very often we're very project driven. We see this as a project, but actually it needs to be something that's baked into the organization. So understanding whether or not you will have a sustainability officer, whether or not a task force will be created within the organization to ensure the implementation of any sustainable efforts. Ensuring that you report on it, and it becomes actually part of your annual reporting, where you can be quite honest with yourselves and say, what have you done well, but equally, where have you failed? Where do you need to make improvements? And to take the opportunity to sort of reconsider, okay, what are the next steps? Where can we go from here? Some nice sustainable water there. Okay. So we talked a little bit about the topic of how do we educate people, what tends to be their objections. I would like to point this at yourself. Do any of these ring true? Do you have any sort of additional points that you would like to share? on some of the objections that you get, why people are saying that they don't want to go ahead and take a green loan from you?
So we launched the chatbot in August. So what we are doing now is just testing what from these conversations that our clients had with the chatbot, we observed that they are just curious. I think sometimes I think that they are more curious on how the chatbot answers than the sustainability domain. They just when Hermina, the chatbot, that's the name of Hermina, of the chatbot. When Hermina tells them about the green loan we can offer to them, they just say we are not interested, something like that. So they don't give a particular reason why they don't want the green loan. In fact, the main reason, I think the main reason is just because they don't have a green project to implement. That's the reason they are not interested in taking a green loan. As I said, for us, just seeing the conversation and seeing that we have to provide all the information the clients ask for, it's a success for now. I mean, as I said, for now, because we are at the beginning, we are focusing a lot on educating people. Because as I said, in Romania we have, like, it's a lack of education, like big lack of education. So I didn't see any like excuses for not taking a green loan.
But are your terms and conditions, are they more harsh? Obviously I can. Sorry? Yeah, me would be an interesting question. Is like, are they comparable to conventional loans? The only difference is that you're particularly targeting a set criteria.
The interest rate is lower, like
Okay.
much lower.
Okay.
We observed that for this type of loans because, like, I don't know, it's.
So is it lower than your regular interest rates, or is it lower than the minimum interest rates in the market?
Both. I mean, when comparing to other green loans that are given in Romania, it's lower.
Mm-hmm. I think it's very interesting, but I think that, and you have this, you have your chatbot, and you are able to see the conversations that are being had.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a public chatbot in our website, and people can access the chatbot anytime.
Okay. Do you have any stupid questions, or
What?
do you have any silly questions or stupid questions put into the chatbot?
Of course. Like, I don't know, someone asked Hermina for a date, let's say, but we used the ChatGPT 4.0 version, and also the latest technologies, and Hermina can understand the question and can understand his idea that the question is not related to the main subject, to the green and sustainability domain. And she's very polite, and she says, sorry, this is not related to the subject. Ask me a question, proper question.
Okay.
So for this, like, our IT team really did a good job. Like, for questions that are not related to the subject, Hermina really can really spot them and answer properly.
The IT team was very polite as well.
Also, I think the product manager, I mean me, who coordinated the whole project.
So they were instructed to be polite.
Yeah. And also Hermina was very tested by me.
So when you're talking about how you educate people, Are you talking about how you do it through your chatbot or through Humina?
No, let, for example, Hermina also has, like we trained Hermina on the European Union taxonomy.
Yeah.
That's why she answers really, really well questions.
Yeah.
And also she has she was trained on all the regulations and so on. Now, I mean, for Hermina, of course, like I took some notes, and also maybe we will look for other sources of information. But now, my question is how we educate and make people be more aware in Romania about the sustainability domain. Because after they have these conversations with Hermina, we are not 100% sure that they really learned something from the conversation. I mean, we talked with some clients who interacted with Hermina, and they said, yeah, it's nice, she answers really well. But when we asked what are the lessons or what did you learn from that conversation, they kind of forgot, or something like after the one question we ask our clients is, after this conversation with Hermina, with the chatbot, what do you intend to do or to change in your business? And they said, I will think about it, it's not here, maybe when an opportunity arrives in the future, maybe I will do something about it. So we feel that it's not enough. Even if we created this chatbot, and it was tremendous work to create it, we don't feel that we make people change their behavior. We have a saying at Filbo. We say that first we make, from our experience, we say with the chatbot and with clients, how they interact with them, we say that first we need to make people and our clients transition into their minds, and after that they can make a transition to their business. And we still try to find new ways to do that.
I think it's quite interesting because I think you have maybe two challenges. Number one is that it's understanding what you are and what your main driver is. You know, for example, a provider of green loans.
Yeah,
And
to small entrepreneurs.
And that really comes down to like targeting, sort of like who you're targeting, and are you attracting the right people to your platform who at least has a basic understanding of why they should be sustainable and why a green loan is actually an advantage. And then you've got this other side, which is like where you have people who generally just want money. And they're looking for all different kinds of sources, but you know it's a little bit. I find that a lot of people try to fit a round peg in a square hole, and they try to. In other words, they see it and they like trying to make themselves potentially more suitable, more attractive as a proposition. Or you just have those who say, I don't want to change. You do get those people as well. Change is hard. I think it's like one of the hardest things to do. Okay, so up here we've got like quite a few things here. Some of these sort of go into the psychology of the person who's actually trying to push forward this, such as feelings of you're not important enough to actually affect change. Yeah.
I think the main perception for companies that really want to implement projects, and there are two main issues. On one side, they perceive it that it costs so much.
Yes.
And of course, because Romanian companies are in contact with lots of companies nearby, from Turkey, Ukraine, or I don't know, not to mention China and so on. No one else is doing it, why should I? I'm losing part of my competitive advantages when I'm investing too much in this direction and so on. So how do you address this? I mean, it's clear a matter of education, and you have the regulations that will impose it, but if you want to
Yeah, I mean,
Change this perception, this I don't know how to.
I mean, like, to be honest, the topic of it costs too much. We started off with the hypothesis that actually the sustainable development is actually aligned with our business objectives, such as, you know, reducing costs and making more efficient use of, for example, the resources that we have. So, you know, in a way, there are arguments for this, and I don't think everything has to be too expensive. I think that there's a big question if you turn around and say, we manufacture plastic bottles and it just simply makes sense to manufacture them in China because there's nobody else in Europe who's actually manufacturing at the scale, quality, speed, cost, and therefore that's why you do it. But then you have the opportunity of obviously to talk about, you know, other opportunities that suggest, hey, this is a sustainable and more desirable product, and you know, that's something that's kind of the other side. I think that there are always going to be some sort of trade-offs in terms of the decisions that you make in this area, but I think it's about making the right ones, and I think it's very much an individual case. So it's so depending on your own organization or what your objectives are. But in principle, there are a lot of different challenges that you will face and lots of different objectives, objections. But the thing is that there are always arguments for why you should go forward. Next one. But ultimately it boils down to sort of really taking the opportunity to understand the issues. Very often I think that when we have conversations about topics like sustainability, one of the things that we very rarely do is listen and ask the right questions and try to find out what the issues are. I think that very, very often if we I don't know if this is a PC to say, but it's a little bit like a relationship. If somebody's angry at you, or if somebody's not prepared to, if you're talking to a child and you're saying, hey, let's go to the park, and they don't want to go, you know, you have to have a conversation with them and talk about the issues. And it's only through having that open conversation can you actually really try to identify them and tackle them. And so that does require a desire in this whole process not to be a little bit militant and say, hey, we must do this, but actually to try and understand that there are different perspectives on the issue, and that to form the best arguments, we have to identify all the issues and see if we can incorporate them into the solution. And that brings me onto the topic of startups, and I'm going to try, because I'm very conscious of the time actually. So startups play an important role in this journey. As I said, that my background pretty much comes from the identification of early stage high-tech projects, very often coming out of universities run by masters and PhD students, and what we try to do is we try to support them in commercializing very often those technologies, and how we support them, or how we identify them and score them and evaluate them is also down to our focus, which is to make sure that we're developing diverse teams, because obviously, and I will talk a little bit about this in our exercise, we believe in the importance of equality, in particular on the gender side, and also we look at sustainability as well. So those companies or those startups, those ideas that are potentially going to solve problems for maybe your companies or the companies of people that you interact with. But there's always a big question when you actually start to think about where do we go, why should we actually go out and start talking to startups? Well, very often it's because they give you access to technology that you don't have access to. So that's number one. Very often that technology is superior to something that you may be using or have internally. Or it's simple, you basically have a problem and you don't know the answer to solving it. So very often going out and speaking to or looking at startups is a great way to try and overcome that. Here's a nice little metrics. These are essentially the different ways in which you might actually want to engage or interact with a startup, or think about not just startup, but think about innovation in general. Build is obviously very much based on what you intend to do within your organizations to acquire the talent to build up the capabilities. There's a lot of advantages there because you actually own the IP, and you have all the control and you get all the profits from everything that you create. But it does take a lot of commitment in terms of time and resources, and it tends to be a less flexible approach. These are the two that I advocate for, which is like the venture clienting and the venture partnering route. Venture clienting is essentially, you can imagine it's actually working with startups and becoming a customer, okay? And using that maybe early adoption phase, to actually have some degree of leverage in terms of how that startup might develop, but essentially you are the customer. So,
I'm sorry I'm interrupting you because I see the people trying to, is it going to be available, this presentation for them afterwards? Or?
if you would like it.
Because now the people seems like they would like to have it.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I will share it with Liviu. If you're on his newsletter, then so I'm trying to tie it in. If you're a part of his newsletter, then you'll receive it, I'm sure. Okay. So here, basically, when you think about venture clienting, basically you're going out to seek external capabilities. You need to define the framework in which you actually collaborate with a startup, and pretty much what you're doing is you're outsourcing. The greatest thing is that very often these companies are already very close to being on market, if not already on the market. They tend to have a standardized solution that you can use. You have a lot of flexibility here and access to their technology, but the downside is that you just are a client, right? And there is no exclusivity there or anything like that, but they could be solving a big problem for you. Venture partnering is another thing. It's a little bit more complex because actually you do a lot of co-collaboration together with the startup, potentially building new technologies. It's not just a matter of providing financial resources, but actually you have to be prepared to provide knowledge, data, and actually very often dedicate people within your company to actually ensuring that this project goes through. That's a little bit more of an involved part, but the good thing is that you can get to the market faster and you get to benefit from the dynamism of the startup, but you do have limited control over the partner. And then what tends to happen is that you also get those cases where companies say, I want to do venture partnering with you and develop this, do this co-creation of a new technology, but then maybe I want to buy you, buy you out. But that's not venture partnering. Okay, that's something else. And I think that what companies should do is be prepared to get involved, but actually say to themselves, okay, I'm not going to buy this company. I'm going to let it be itself, go out and develop new relationships and develop new customers. Because if you want to buy it, then you just go for the investment. And defining how you want to work and how you want to solve some of your problems or challenges is really important. So here you just basically go out, you invest in them or you buy them out, you have access to their tech, you have access to their IP, but you also take on a certain degree of risk, which otherwise the startup would do. So I want to just quickly now, I'm going to do this quick fire because I like these companies, but I don't have a lot of time to invest in them right now. Delta Analytics, it's a really great team. It comes out of a research project from the TU Graz. They're now commercializing it, sticking it into a platform. Essentially what they're able to do is to, in many cases, reduce energy consumption by 30%. This has a dramatic impact on cost reduction within large office buildings. And of course, because they're using AI to do things like fault detection, it actually reduces the downtime of any capital that you might have already in the building. So you're optimizing the use of existing technologies. Very exciting project. I love them, and this is one of the companies that I consult. Another one is S2 Data. It's called S2 Data because the two founders are Stefan and Stefan. So they call it S2 Data. They're a great team. They're mathematicians. They started within our incubator, just the two of them. They have now 20 people working for them within, I think, like 1 or 2 years after leaving our incubator. And they're growing rapidly and trying to find new business cases. But what they do is they actually they actually reduce the amount of transportation that you need to be involved in when moving product from one place to another, right? They essentially, their claim is that they make that logistics process automated and so efficient that effectively every 5th truck that you use is free. That's how they do it. So, and that has obviously a tremendous impact in terms of reducing CO2 as well within any sort of industry where logistics plays an important role.
A lot of air.
Sorry?
We're transporting a lot of air, packaging. So that's
Yes.
sent to customers.
Exactly.
By doing this with big boxes of cardboard, we are transporting a lot of air.
Exactly, and that's what they do. So they look at the scheduling of deliveries between different places, and they help those types of companies. They have a particular focus on the automotive sector at the moment, but it doesn't mean that they can't address other areas too. It was quite interesting because this was one of the classic cases where they came in, they were doing this stuff, they were optimizing the usage of the lorries. And I said, well, that's surely reducing CO2, right? And they go, yeah. I said, why don't you put a CO2 indicator on your platform so that people can actually measure or get an indicator for, how sustainable they're being? And so they put this in there, and of course it's a big thing. It's one of their big claims now because it's it's becoming more important. It is already important, but it's becoming more aware. People are becoming more aware of it. Okay. This is another company. It's based in Vienna. I love it very much. I like the founders. I bumped into one of them. I had a bit of an embarrassing moment. The founder CEO, he came up to me whilst I was looking at a board at this event in Munich. And he started speaking to me and goes, oh, those Styrians, you find them everywhere. And he was talking to me in German, and I looked at him, I go, I've got no idea what you're saying. Unfortunately, my German or my Steirischer, which is a region of Austria, is not so great. But it just shows that to be successful, to be a startup, you actually need to be everywhere, and they are. But what they basically do is they look at they go into shops. So if you look at Review or Spar, I don't know, what would be a local supermarket chain here? Yeah. So these companies have huge product ranges, and they have zero understanding of what is the carbon impact of their product ranges.
Huh? They have.
Yeah.
Most of them have in Romania.
Yeah. So one of the rationales and motivations behind the founders of this company was that the belief was that, okay, if you import a tomato from Spain, does that have less of a CO footprint than getting a locally produced one? It just so happens that because the climate is not so great, you need to actually build these greenhouses, and then you need to be producing a lot of power to heat them, and actually they become much less sustainable. So what they do is they go across all the different product ranges, and they provide a comprehensive scoring of the impact of your product range. It's really quite cool. This one here is a little bit more high-tech. So these guys are actually manipulating enzymes in biocatalytic processes in order to create new products, new materials, should I say, for like alternative production to, say, plastics and things like that. So they can. It's not just focused around that. They can also produce new enzymes, new products for medicines, etc. But actually producing new materials. And they've developed an automated process that enables you to identify novel reactions with enzymes to create these new substances. This is a really cool one. I like them very much. I've only just started working with them. But they've essentially found a way to create foam out of cellulose. So it's not using plastics or anything like that. It's using cellulose, which is 100% recyclable. And the interesting thing is that they were going out and they were saying, okay, how do we produce this? Or what should we do with this, this foam? And they was thinking about the auto industry because you have a lot of foam insulation and also impact products within cars. And I said, oh gosh, that's going to take a long time to change the supply chain for a car. And we turned around and they said, well, surely there's another use case where it's, let's say, more consumable and more of a bigger issue. And we basically decided to come up with the concept of a sustainable inner sole using the foam. So the foam, they can create it to have the properties that you would hope and expect to have in your shoe. So you can go out and create more sustainable footwear. And there are lots of other applications, for example, building insulation, etc., etc. White Flavor is a nice, cool team. They're sort of like creating, using yeast factories for producing different flavor profiles. In particular, focused on meat. So if you think about alternative meat products, very often you're using, like, I don't know, soybeans or something like that. They tend to not taste very appealing, especially if you're accustomed to eating a meat-based product and trying to switch. Okay, and so what they've done is they've developed this process that actually enhances the flavor profile of meat or alternative meats, not actually meats, by 30%. In other words, they're more delicious if you happen to like eating meat. But they can also do other things. So, for example, they can create novel tastes. So they can create like an almond flavor. So, for example, if you have a nut allergy, but you still want to have that flavor of almonds in your product, then you can actually go to them and you can eat that alternative flavor, maybe if you're like that, and and not die. That's useful. Okay, and of course, another big topic in terms of food innovation is this whole concept of having clean labels. The idea being that people are becoming much more conscious about the foods that they eat, reducing the amount of salt intake and all the other preservatives, and basically they contribute to the creation of clean labels that and foods that don't require so much salts. Econutri, another really very interesting one. Basically, these guys have created a bioreactor that produces they found an organism, a unique organism that actually generates proteins. And it's a very high source of high quality protein. So 80% of the product is protein. The great thing is it uses green hydrogen, and the organisms consume CO2 when they produce the protein. So actually they're great consumers of CO2, which is of course a desirable property. And they are producing these proteins predominantly at the moment for animal feeds, mainly focused on fish. Because actually, I don't know if you know this, but big fish farms get fed lots of fish, and this is a problem for example, for our oceans. But the application is much broader because, of course, you can go into human consumption, but also things like makeups. Proteins are everywhere. And then this is the last one that I want to introduce you to, which is Reteam Solar Technologies. Basically, these are really interesting guys. They're actually raising money at the moment. And what they do is they have this panel, which is photosensitive, that when the sunlight hits the panel, it actually extracts the hydrogen from water. So you can actually create green hydrogen. So their sort of vision for the future is like creating big fields where actually you can produce, like you have with the solar arrays or solar panels, you can set this up and you actually produce green hydrogen. It's very interesting. And then the hydrogen can be used in the other company. And the great thing is that they've developed it so that you don't have to have this ultra pure H2O source. You can actually just use tap water or what have you. So it's very interesting stuff. I could actually talk to you about so many different companies that are actually developing very, very intriguing and exciting green technology products. And the one thing I'd actually like to say, I had a panel discussion with the guy from the Fryzine. And also from another guy who actually has created a redox flow battery. These are sort of large batteries that have an electrolyte that stores the energy. Doesn't matter, they don't need to be super small for going into phones, but they're ideal for sticking on a solar farm or a wind farm and absorbing some of the excess energy that's produced when we're not consuming it quite as much. And the lesson that they said is that sustainability is important, but it's not the reason why their product or their service or their startup is successful or will be successful. It's kind of like the main goal is to actually create great technology that actually changes the way in which we do things or consume things. And in the process, it is sustainable. Because very often going out there with marketing and saying, hey, we're green, as you are finding, it's not enough. You know, you actually still have to create great financial products that people want to have because, yeah, you know, they're good. And this becomes even more so pressing as, for example, we're going to see in the future, if we switch from hydrocarbons to other sources of materials, actually the prices are going to come down. And so there's going to be even a greater need for these companies to actually produce superior and financially competitive products. So the economics are going to be there as well that you have to fight. So being focused on great innovation has to be, you know, for me is a real priority. Okay, so I want to do a little bit of group work now. If you've still got a little bit of energy left after listening to me talking for all this time, if we can maybe do this in about 25 minutes or so it shouldn't take too long. But I will tell you the task, and then you can decide if you decide to go to the loo or not. Or top up on your coffee reserves, caffeine reserves. So I want to work with the SDGs. I've put on the back here on these tables some of the SDGs which are listed there. So you'll be divided into groups. I don't mind if you want to self-organize this. I'm not sure if that's the way in which groups work. But anyway, if you want to organize yourselves into groups, what I want you to do is I want you to go through the SDGs and identify them and try to decide which ones for you in your particular objectives are considered to be low-hanging fruits, i.e. easy to achieve, which are outstanding, not currently relevant for the company, and which opportunities and SDGs.
Is good health and well-being.
Okay.
Number 15, life on land.
Okay.
So for low-hanging fruits, for the number 3, we choose flexible hours,
Okay.
medical insurance
Okay.
for employees, and subscription to health for going to gym.
Okay.
You know. And as outstanding goals for our company should be that the employees should be more productive by 20%.
Okay.
And the opportunities for our company should be retention, talent acquisition, and employees more engaged in the company.
Okay. Sounds great. And the other one?
Okay, the 15, the life on land. The low-hanging fruits should be reforesting and recycling training. The outstanding goals should be increasing by 5% the forest in the community.
Okay.
Okay, and opportunities zero waste. The company should go zero waste by 2050.
Okay. Thank you. It's, I mean, like the important thing here is not to judge yourself harshly or anything like that, but to, yeah, absolutely. So it's about getting into the topic and thinking about it, and actually taking the opportunity to think more broadly around, you know, what are you seeking out of these SDGs, and how can you actually contribute to them? So I think that's great. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So we have chosen the fourth goal of sustainability, quality education. So for the low-hanging fruits category, we thought about internal trainings for our employees.
Mm-hmm.
And also we added team buildings on sustainability. At least at Fieldball, we have this. Like we go with our employees.
From experience.
Yeah. And plant trees and do stuff like that. And also like we have let's say kind of expert who tells us about the sustainability, like look, you planted 250 trees like we did in March, and you will, I don't know, you will
Dismiss
contribute
two,
to
to,
the,
2 tons of CO2.
yeah, you will contribute to nature, like to save nature. For the outstanding goals categories, here we thought about general courses, like not focused courses. Like we think that this is not that they are not very valuable. I mean, they should be pretty targeted on our activities, let's say. And for the opportunities, brainstorming ideas, engaging all employees and brainstorming ideas on what we can do better in our company.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, but it's also important to think about, okay, how frequently do those activities have to take place? So try to give it a little bit more